Song of Solomon, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. They're stapled together, so just grab them on the back of the way out, the question sheets for the next 3 classes. And next week's class, if everybody comes down with the flu and you can't make it, that'll be okay. It's Song of Solomon. No children allowed in the class. Have a chance to go over that. We're going to deal with it. It's in the Bible, but there are certain things we won't read publicly. Go ahead and read them privately. That's a good thing because it's a great book about relationships between a husband and a wife, the bride and her husband, and there's going to be a lot of useful tools for that. I mean, it's just a great study, especially for husbands and wives and for those who may plan on getting married someday. It's just some interesting information there, to say the least. Okay, before we get into our Bible study on the book of Ecclesiastes, I'm going to ask Trent if you would lead us in a word of prayer, and we'll get going. Trent?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for giving us another opportunity to come together and worship and sing praises to you, dear Lord. Pray that as we go throughout this class this evening, that things that are said, that it might be according to your will, dear Lord, might be pleasing in your sight, dear Lord. Pray that as we go throughout this week, that we might be able to keep these things that we learned here today, dear Lord, and use them in our daily lives and help teach others to turn towards you, Christ. Pray to be with us as we go throughout the week and guide us, guard us, and protect us. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, definitely we're going to be fulfilling what Trent talked about, just like with the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes. You talk about practical teaching that we can use in our own lives. I always give you guys a brief outline before we go ahead and deal with our questions as we go through the book and get you guys to do some reading, but just some general overview of the book. The main thing, which we were going to talk about, was your first question or answer to that question. What's the theme of the book? Vanity, always vanity. But we will talk about that, the vanities of life. Time for everything. In chapter 3, 4 and 5, more vanities and the need to serve God. Emptiness of wealth without contentment. With wisdom, there are better choices. And that's really kind of cool, because if you talk to people about the decisions that we make, some of the hardest decisions we make in life are the difference between what's good and what's best. Really, when you think about that. The good and the bad, those are pretty obvious. Those are easy decisions to make. Man, but when you're dealing with something that, well, that's a good decision, but this would be better, that's even more challenging, which tells you the importance of needing wisdom. Death comes to all, the description for, and then interesting, we'll talk about that later this evening, description of one without wisdom, and the importance of being a worker and seeking God early in life. And so, as you can tell from what we have on the board there, we're going to have some good discussion and application for us today, because these are timeless lessons. All right, so we've got your book of Ecclesiastes open. Why don't we just go ahead, and we're going to have, let's start over with Janet this evening. Janet, if you'll read verses 1, 2, and 12. 1, 2, and 12, and I've got a few comments to make.
The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem.
Okay, so, if somebody asks you, what does Ecclesiastes mean? Kind of give you a hint with our readers. Preacher. It's basically a preacher. The lessons that are being taught are taught by who? Do you think that he would have pretty good insight about what really vanity is? And when we talk about vanity as vanity, what's vanity? What was that? Useless. What do you have? Inflated pride of self. Yeah. Warren, same thing? Yeah. So, obviously the vanities of life are things that are not going to be profitable. People waste a lot of time and energy worrying and striving for things that really don't matter to me. We're not going to have a chance to go verse by verse in this book, but if you have a chance to study this and read it on your own, you're going to see where the person faces those frustrations of worrying about, it's one thing to go through life trying to get ahead, But if all you're doing is worrying about who gets your possessions after you die, that just sucks the life out of you. You've got all this that you've worked for, and yet you're fretting about, it's going to go to somebody who didn't even work for it. Now you're all upset about it. It just puts things in perspective for us as we go through life. Okay. The question that we had in number 2 was, state what was said in chapter 1 that is often quoted, which is just as true today as the day it was uttered. And we often say it a lot, Janet.
Nothing new under the sun.
There's nothing new under the sun. Now, why is that a true statement? Why would that be a true statement? Think it through. Because even though we say it all the time, there's nothing new under the sun. What are we saying?
Almost like it cuts full circle, but you can pretty much any problem that comes up in life, you can go somewhere in the Bible, and it could be a little different because they didn't have social media like
right.
It'll be a little different, but as far as the base of the problem, you can find it here.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Because the experiences of life, how many times you've heard people say, nobody knows the troubles I've seen? Can they say that? No, you don't think they know. But seriously, every one of us, and that's why is that comforting? Why could that be comforting to us to know that there's nothing new under the sun? How could you find comfort in that?
Somebody else has been through it.
Yes, you can go to a brother or sister. Can they identify with what you're going through? Well, of course. Maybe not the exact same thing like Janet was talking about, but it just surfaces in a different way. Okay? It's just clothed in a different way. But it's really nothing new. And so we find that's kind of a comfort. And at the same token, by realizing that, it will remove us from the idea of complaining as if I'm the only one who's going through this. And we can say, dude, really, there's nothing new under the sun. And so other people have faced the very same things, and we need to face it and move on. Okay? Now, the next reading I have for Denise. Denise, we're going to move over to the second chapter, and I would like for you to read verse 10. Verse 10. Well, actually, 9, 10, and 11, please, from chapter 2.
Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. And all that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun.
Okay, really? So the question that I have here was, what did Solomon say that really led to his downfall? What was it that Denise just read?
Whatever he wanted to do, there's no self-control.
So whatever he wanted, he got, right? And so it was out of control. If you want everything you see, what kind of person are you? You're greedy, materialistic. Self-gratification is the most important thing. What's missing? Selflessness. Okay. When you see that, and everything that he wanted, he got it. Now wait a second. So how did he come to the conclusion then, if what he saw he wanted and then he got it, why would he say it's all vanity? Right.
It's satisfying. Yeah, longing.
So it wasn't satisfying.
Joy, basically.
But let's help us. Let's all think about this, because we don't want to fall into this trap. Like, why wasn't it, Denise?
Well, he put all of his joys in worldly things and forgot about God.
Okay. But there's some people who, will we deny the fact that there are some people in this world that are not Christians that are very happy with what they have? Okay, so what I'm wanting us to see here is that, and they don't have God. Okay, there's some people that don't have God, don't want God, and they're very happy with what they have. Would that be a fair assumption? You know, because there's some people who say that, oh, these people out there, they're not really happy. I've seen some of the shows on the web. They look pretty happy. Okay? Now, but we need to figure out why is it that Solomon ended up saying all is vanity. Yes, because God wasn't there, but
Well, he at one time was in fellowship with God, and God granted him all wisdom of the earth because of his humility. So he knew that joy and fulfillment of being with God, and then he lost that fellowship when he turned idols with his form on it.
that's exactly what happened. And so what really, as somebody mentioned earlier, I think Denise mentioned, that what you were really hoping to get from these things, it wasn't lasting. Because usually what happens is that you want that, and then what? Well, then you want more, right? It's almost like a drug. The problem, you know, when you think about the drugs, is it satisfying? For a moment, right? Like the Hebrews 11, you know, the passing pleasure of sin. It does last. And I really think what you have going on here, when Solomon says, whatever my eyes desires, I did not keep from them. But then he comes down and he says, well, indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. Now, why that illusion? Why is that so cool, grasping for the wind?
Well, normally people, when they want something, they get it, and then they want more, and they want more, and they want more, and it's just a cycle, a vicious cycle, and then they figure out that none of it makes them happy or in fellowship with the Lord.
That comes into play. But grasping for the wind is basically what? You can't get it.
Futile, right?
Yeah, it's futile. It's waste. Hey, grab it. Grab the wind, you guys. Grab the air. You're not doing it. Okay? And so you have to come to that realization. Now, a lot of people don't come to that, and that's why we need to be learning from others, okay? So you might say to yourself, well, let me just be as rich as him, and let me go through my own experiences, thank you. Let me find out for myself. No, learn from this, because this led to his downfall. When you keep striving, you want, it's like grasping for the air. And you have to see the futility of it all. It is a waste, and it's not sustaining. It's not sustaining. And that's what you and I want. That's what the great thing about our faith that we have, that's really the overlining theme of this book, of you want something that is going to be satisfying and lasting. And you guys already touched on it. Our relationship with God, if all of a sudden death comes upon you sooner than planned, how does that ruin your life? It does if what?
If you're in recovery.
Yeah, if you're focused on the here and now, that's like a guy on his deathbed going, I was going to retire next week. Seriously, when you look at it from that perspective, right? It's like, how hopeless. But for the Christian, I was going to retire next week, but hey, instant death, instant glory. They look at things a little differently. But there is a huge danger, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but do we or do we not live in a materialistic society? What are they trying to promote? They're trying to promote, with the commercials and the ads, that you're going to truly be happy if you buy this, this, and this, and this, and this. You're not happy unless you get this. They're trying to portray that you need all this stuff to really be happy. Warren.
One of the things that comes out what you're talking about is the alcohol beer commercials.
Oh.
I mean, everybody, they show these young people and everybody's just happy. It's just such a wonderful time. But they don't show the other dark side. We know the dark side.
That's it. Thank you, Warren. Because that's what Solomon is trying to get us to see. See the dark side. But people don't want to think about the dark side. There can't be a dark side to having too much money. Having too much money is like having too much fun. People don't see the dangers. Where Jesus says, how hard is it for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? It's easy for a camel to go through an eye of a needle, right? And he said, well, that sounds impossible. What did it go on to say? But all things are possible with God. So you can make it and be rich, but learn the lessons here. Beware of the dangers that loom. So then we get into the third chapter that we have here, and I'm going to have Tessa go ahead and read. And so, Tessa, in chapter 3, there's a couple of things I want us to read. It wasn't first in our reading, but we would be amiss if you didn't go ahead and read the first 8 verses. Time for everything.
To everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace.
All right. Now, within all of that, guys, tell me. It should have jumped right off the page to you. What's the great lesson? There's an overall lesson here in reading all of this. It's actually trying to clear up a very important danger. What do you think it is? No, it's what happens when you emphasize one of them over the other. Like, in other words, I don't want to have time for this. I only want to have time. Look what he said. If you're only going to have time to cast away stones. Well, see, you can, what the danger, we're talking about balance. This is a teaching about balance. And when you talk about there's a time to embrace and a time not to. And if all you do is embrace, what happens? Nothing gets done. Right? So I want us to see here that a time to keep, and if all you're doing is keeping and keeping and keeping, and you never throw away, what do you become? You become a hoarder. Okay. And that's not a good thing. But I just want you to see that within this idea of talking about, well, there's a time for everything, people sometimes want to not think about things that are inevitable. What's the obvious one people don't want to think about? They don't want to think about death, right? They're just like, oh, I'm here for a long time. I don't have to worry about what lies beyond the grave. Listen, it could happen. And it's appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. And so you have to understand that this is what you call life. It's life, guys. There's birth and there's death. And that's just the way it goes. Now, there's something in this chapter I asked you guys to read later on in this chapter, near the end, that it says there's one thing that man does not have over the animals. He doesn't have an advantage of. Anybody get the answers to that? Thank you. Can you dodge it? No. It's going to happen to all of us, right? And does it happen to animals? It happens to animals. And so you think about, well, we're superior to the animals. Are we? Better be.
Well, it's what makes it different, because we contemplate we're going to die.
And they don't, right? I mean, you talk about a sheep to the slaughter, you don't know what's going on, right? And that's the big difference when you talk about Isaiah 53, when you talk about Jesus. Big difference in the garden, he knew it was coming. Okay? Animals, oblivious. And they don't have a soul. But you and I, we do. And it's important that we keep that perspective as we go through this. Okay. I asked you guys in chapter 4 to go ahead and list some other vanities that are mentioned here. We'll get some other readings I'll get you guys to read here in just a few moments. But what did you guys have for some of the vanities that were mentioned in chapter 4? Envy. It was right there, wasn't it? Look what we have. Let's. Who hasn't read? Trent, can you read 3, 4, 5, and 6?
But better than both is the one who has never been born, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind.
All right. Yeah, I like the way Solomon puts his stuff. It's very vivid. When he talks about the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. You picture that, right? There's a guy. What's he doing? Yeah, he's not doing anything. There's a hard worker. What do we call those guys? When they're like this, changing the channel. Couch potatoes, right? Laziness. That's one of the ones you could throw in there with the list that you had there. And of course, the longing for riches. It's just a waste of time. There's nothing wrong with getting ahead. There's a difference. When does getting ahead become a problem? What's the attitude that we have to watch out for?
They come before God.
Yes. And Paul put it best when he said, the having of money is bad? No, he said, the love of money is what? The root of all kinds of evil. If that's what you love. No, that's your job, but that's not your life. The people that focus on their job, neglects their family, neglects their responsibilities, and just claims to be too busy. Can people be too busy? There's no question. You can get so busy that you don't have time for the Lord. All right. Now in chapter 5, 1 through 7, David, if you would go ahead and read that, please. Powerful stuff.
Walk prudently when you go to the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through such much activity, and a fool's voice is known by as many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity. Fear God.
Okay. Love this text. Now we've been dealing with this a little bit on Sunday mornings in James chapter 3. What was some of the advice that was given here? Concerning what, first of all? All right. And what was some of the advice that we had received? I said list a few of them, such as what?
Do not be quick with your mouth. Words be few. And many words mark a fool.
Yes.
Make a vow to God and fulfill it quickly.
Yeah, be careful what you say, right? You make promises and you have no intention of following through with them. And that's a person who, again, doesn't think before he speaks. You have to watch the tongue. Now, there's something rather interesting. I'll mention this before we go on to our next point because I really want to get through all our questions tonight. But as David was reading, he talked about here, verse 6, do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin. How does my mouth cause my flesh to sin? How can your mouth cause your flesh to sin? Yeah. That's part of it. That's right.
You want to get yourself into a confronting situation, talk yourself into something, either leave yourself way out.
True. By the way, guys, at work, can a man or a woman utter something to the opposite sex and get them in trouble? You gotta watch what comes out of your mouth. There's certain things that you just don't talk about. You just don't talk about. But some people they talk about those things because they want to plant a seed. Remember, we already studied about the young lad who was devoid of understanding, that was out late at night and walking where he shouldn't have been. And she's saying things like, I've paid my vow today. Oh, you're very religious. My husband is out of town. I have prepared the bedroom. Why are you saying this to me? You should be saying, well, see, they have a purpose for that, okay? You need to see the dangers of the tongue in so many different facets of our life. We just think, well, maybe the cussing or the lying. It's not just that. It's saying things that should not be uttered that can get us into all kinds of trouble. Are you familiar with the term flirting? What does it mean to flirt? What does it mean? We use the term.
Sounds like you're after somebody, but you just don't have to do it.
Yeah, you kind of do it in a kind of an innocent way, right? You're saying things that you shouldn't be saying, okay? And you're crossing that line. I'm not going to dwell all night on that because we've been doing that on Sunday mornings. But again, you see here talking about what's vanity and beware of the dangers that lie therein. Okay. Let's go to chapter 7, and I asked you guys to list some things in here that were better. I'm just going to have somebody read. Steve, can you read verse 2 and in verse 5? Those are the two I chose. You guys might have some others in just a few moments. But from chapter 7, Steve, read verse 2 and in verse 5.
Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools.
All right, now I picked those two. I said, guys, pick some that jump out to you here. The number 5 there, the verse 5, I've used a lot because I remember the first time I read it. It's so long ago, but it always just struck a chord with me. How that it's better to hear good constructive criticism than empty foolish flattery. And people think that's so good to hear that. No, but he says here, what's better? And then the one mentioned here, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. Why would that be better? Who wants to go to the house of mourning rather than the house of feasting?
That's when people need you the most.
You're needed the most. You're sober-minded, right? You come to appreciate things, having a heart. It's better to go to the house of mourning. And Jesus even used that in the Sermon on the Mount. How important it is. One of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn. When people don't mourn, you're going to be in trouble. Because if you can't mourn, what are you not going to do? If you can't mourn, what are you not going to do? You're not going to repent of your sin. You get to feel better. What else are you not going to do? Right, show compassion. Because if you can't mourn, you can't show compassion for those that are around you. Is there anything else? Those are the two that jumped out at me. Number 2, the third one.
No, it's a reminder that you're going to die. And so it's a reminder that, like you're saying, you have to be right with God. And so all things come to an end. And you think, like I think about Job, where he had all these blessings and everybody thought, oh, he must be great. Everything must be right. And then when it went bad, everybody's like, oh, he must have sinned and everything. And even though he didn't, it's a good reminder that everything's going to end at some point, and all that matters is where you stand with God.
I like that because we've got to bring in the reality. I didn't think about that one. Bring in the reality of mourning. Is it coming? I mean, you wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but you see these young people that got their whole lives ahead of them, and I don't know who's the youngest of you right now. Maybe it's Kate. But you look at that and you say, here's a young person. Say, does she have any heartache ahead of her? Do you think you're going to cry in the future, Kate? Do you think you're going to cry? Why? Why would she be so certain she's going to cry? Because she's leaving the nest, other than that. Oh, the cooking, the cleaning. No, heartache comes to everybody. It's the point. It's the reality of life. Death comes to family members, right? These kind of things happen, and it breaks our heart. But it also helps us to be the kind of Christian that we can be, because to mourn is to appreciate what somebody did for us. Jesus. It helps us to have a heart. Okay? All right. Then we get into the next one. Jade, in a minute, I'll get you to read from, we're going to be in chapter 9. And if you go ahead in chapter 9 and read verse 6, because the question is, tell the lesson the living learn when taught about the dead in chapter 9. And Jade, read verse 6 for us.
Also their love, their hatred, and their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun.
And then, of course, he goes, go eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil. Okay, so the question that we had here, tell the lesson the living learn when taught about the dead. There's something powerful here that you shouldn't feel guilty about. What does Solomon want us to understand about life? What happens when you die? It's gone. All your opportunities to enjoy things here. Now, this isn't a lesson that there are some good things lying beyond the grave. Don't misunderstand. But you know what? Should you feel guilty to enjoy things of this earth? No, God put them there for us to enjoy. And once you die, you're not going to enjoy those anymore. This isn't a lesson to say these are more enjoyable than the things you're going to enjoy after you die. That's not his point. His point is that while you are alive, you can enjoy them. But in this book, he's showing how people, the joy is being sucked out of them. Why? Even while they are alive. Why is the joy being sucked out of them? Because they're not finding contentment, man.
Well, I think I look at the hatred portion of it and kind of take that to heart because, like, I may hate Chuck Bartlett, and when I die, what good did that really do for me? And how many years did I spend hating you? And how much energy did I put into hating you? And then when I'm dead, my feelings towards you are no different than my feelings towards my wife or the people that I love the most. Like it was worth it. It was pointless to put so much hate into.
Powerful point, Matt. That's exactly right. Who cares if he's moving? There's no reason for hatred. Good stuff. But yeah, that's excellent, and we got to get going here. Question number 1: describe some observations attributed to a person lacking wisdom in chapter 10. And I'll just go ahead and have Jade read chapter 10 and verse 1. Or did you read, Jade? Did you already read?
I read.
You read. Warren, can you read chapter 10 and verse 1, please? Chapter 10, verse 1.
It flies putrefied, the perfumer's ointment, cause it to give off the foul odor. So is a little flower to one, respected for wisdom and honor.
Whoa. You want to get an idea of what it's like to meet somebody who doesn't have any wisdom? Can you get much more descriptive? How does that appeal to you? Pretty gross, if you ask me. When he talks about dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment, causing a foul odor. Have you ever met somebody who really lacks wisdom? You come up with the saying, you just can't fix stupid. Have you met anybody that lacks wisdom? Is it appealing? Nah.
Well, I don't think this one's necessarily talking about somebody that lacks wisdom as much as it is, because it said somebody that's respected for their wisdom. I think it's somebody almost like a reputation. Like you've got a reputation of being a wise person. If you make one mistake, you've got this whole bottle of ointment. One little fly can ruin the whole thing. You make one mistake, despite how wise you are and what your reputation is, and that one little mistake could, shoot your whole reputation in the foot and your wisdom that you're known for.
Yeah, let's read on. You're absolutely right. Look at 2. A wise man's heart is at his right hand. A fool's heart is at his left. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he's a fool. If the spirit of the rule rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses. As he's continuing to talk about here, when you walk, people, the point is, the fool doesn't think people notice. That's foolish. But that's what happens when you lack wisdom, right? When you lack wisdom, people are thinking that you don't lack it. And so, therefore, the lesson for you and I is to make sure that we stay alert of how we are to be. In chapter 11, a man is to accept what limitations in chapter 11 and verse 5. Tina, if you just quickly read verse 5, I hope I have enough time for chapter 12.
As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the works of God in the body.
All right. Is man trying to learn everything?
Yes.
Is man going to learn everything?
No.
I mean, they've learned a lot, right? I mean, the strides they've made in the last, 50 years about DNA. I mean, it's just mind-boggling what they have learned, okay? But have they just scratched the surface? And there's just so much information out there to learn. They're not going to learn it all. So, what's the danger if you can't learn it all? But you're trying to learn it all. Excuse me.
It's not a possibility. We look back at those kinds of things, and I think about the pyramids, the Egyptians, early Egyptians, the things that they did. Though they speculate how they did it, but to see what they did is amazing, and that is all false. They did that without brains, things like we have today.
When man doesn't accept his limitations, he fails to accept what he can know. This is what we do. No, I can't begin to learn this until you tell me where God came from. I need to know where he came from, and I'm going to work on that. Well, where did God come from? Answer? Always was. Now, can man grasp always was? Man only grasps beginning and endings, right? And so that that can hinder people from moving forward when they can't accept their limitations. You can't know that. Well, I got to know that before I'll go over here and do this. And that's going to get them in all kinds of trouble. Now, we have enough time. Good. I'm so glad we've got 8 or 9 minutes, because there's a number of things in this chapter. Kevin, can you read? Oh, there's so much we could read here, but we'll talk about most of the verses. Why don't you just read verse 1 for us, and we'll talk about that.
Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near, when you say, I have no pleasure in them.
Now, you know what he goes on and talks about here, right? What happens to the body as it gets older? What are some things that he describes here? And we're not picking on anybody particular here. What was that? Okay, yeah. So hard of hearing. What else? The grinders. What's that? Oh, I should these. Grinders are low. What else?
The eyes.
Dimness, right? Can't see much. The eyes are going.
Your fears.
Yeah, like this little step here. When you get old, that's huge. They're not. People get older. They're not coming over here to get up. They're going over here, and they're going to hold on to this, and then they're going to. You see, that's just what happens. But he starts out here by saying, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth." How did the youth usually look at that? They're thinking the opposite. What are they thinking?
Time to sow your wild oats.
Yeah, sow your wild oats. There's time to think about God when I'm older. Usually that's the way it is. He says, why remember him now when you're younger? Why? But in line what he said happens to the progression of the body, why remember the Creator of the days of your youth? Because you're able to do all this stuff, right? Man, you get a lot of energy. There's things that you can do. You can be active there.
And you're not creating consequences that you're going to have to deal with the rest of your life sometimes through sin.
Some people make a mistake when they're young and they carry with it the rest of their life. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth.
Because you'll have to get through those times.
That's right. And you see, that's when our young people need God more than ever. Parents, I don't know. A mentor of mine who has preached for, 60 or 70 years, he tells a story about going to congregations where he's gone back year after year after year, and the kids have grown and they're gone and they've fallen away. And he says, You see those parents? They're the most godly people there. They're every night there during the meeting. They're so encouraging. But he remembers back years, no, they weren't there. They were off with the kids at the ball game. They didn't put the priorities with the kids, but as they got older, now they became spiritual. And then they paid the price for it. When really our children, the younger they are, they really need to be taught about putting God first, becoming so godly. The idea of sowing wild oats, it's crazy. Often people sow their wild oats, they don't come back. And that's one of the things that he's talking about here. Another thing he brings up in this chapter is what happens when we die.
We return to dust.
Yeah. Mary, 7 and 8 for us.
Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher of all vanity.
Okay. So he makes a distinction here we want to know. What's the distinction?
Body and spirit.
Body and spirit. That's it. It's going to go back to God who gave it. And we've done some sermons on that recently about what happens when we die. Dealt with that on the radio program. The guy who wanted to know about soul sleeping. We answered that on the radio program. The soul just doesn't sleep until the day of judgment. Taking certain passage literally, failing to understand it represents death. But here he is. He's talking about it. We'll turn to dust. This physical body. And as 1 Corinthians 15 describes, this mortal must put on immortality. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of heaven. And so we all have that soul. Yes, the youth have that. Let's not forget that. The youth have it. And one of the things that's probably quoted the most from this book in sermons is the whole duty of man. Let's keep it simple, right? The whole duty of man. That's what he comes to the conclusion. Here's a guy who had everything, right? Had everything. That if you wanted to, we went through it when we went through the previous books about Solomon's wealth. All that gold, the armor, the shields made out of gold. I mean, just phenomenal. The guy had everything. And he comes to this conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. Yeah, but I got to work. I got to do all this. Don't lose sight of this. You got to have your job. Yeah, you're married. You got marital responsibilities, parental responsibilities. As citizens, you have responsibilities. But remember, we're here to serve God and keep his commandments. So what's that going to entail? This isn't rocket science. What's that going to entail? But before you do that, you got to know it. If you're going to keep his commandments, what do you got to do? You got to study them. You got to know what he has said. And so if that's the whole duty of man, I need to be making time reading, studying, and of course that gets back to the principles you guys were just mentioning. We have to keep them. We're not just educating ourselves on what God wants. We are to be practicing those things, which was Sunday morning saying faith without works is dead. And so if your faith is increasing, what did we say happens? Your works are increasing. They have to. You can't have all this faith and no works because now it's dead. And so this is why when brethren grow, they increase their faith, it becomes evident because you're keeping the commands of God. You're doing his will. And that's what Solomon and all that he went through finally came to that conclusion and understood that it wasn't the money. It wasn't all those possessions. It was all vanity. It's a waste of time. And we need to make sure that we learn that lesson, else we'll end up losing our soul. Thank you guys again. The question sheets are at the back for the next 3 classes.
Good evening. Good to see everybody out on a Wednesday night. Turn in your songbooks, page 824, 824. We will be singing that after Dustin delivers the invitation tonight. 824, after the invitation. Before then, we will be singing 708. Let's turn there now. While you are turning to 708, Dustin will be delivering the invitation, closing prayer. Stick around for a couple of minutes afterward if you can. As things to go through after the communication test he did earlier. Again, 708, walking in sunlight. In sunlight on my journey, over the mountains, through the deep air, Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee, promising mine that never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing His praises. Jesus is mine. Shadows around me, shadows above me, never conceal my Savior and God. He is the light in midst of darkness, ever I'm longing close to His side. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing His praises. Jesus is mine. In the bright sunlight, ever rejoicing, pressing my way to mansions above, singing His praises. Gladly I'm walking in sunlight above. Heavenly sunlight, flooding
is mine.
I invite you to open your Bibles to Luke chapter 23. I'm going to be reading Luke chapter 23 starting in verse 35. And the people stood by, watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. So I read all that to ask you one thing. What is your reaction to Christ? Or what has been your reaction to Christ so far in your life? And we can see several examples to how different people reacted to Christ in this situation when he was on the cross. So verse 35, the people, they just stood by. They did nothing. They had an opportunity to step in and do something, that we don't know what could have happened, but they didn't. They just stood by, it says. Also, verse 35, the rulers, they scoffed at him. They mocked him. They made fun of Christ when he was suffering on the cross. Similarly, verse 36, the soldiers, they also mocked him, telling him to save himself. Again, showing no respect. Verse 39, one of the criminals, he failed to recognize Christ's power. He failed to recognize Christ's authority, and showed absolutely no respect to Christ. And then verse 40, the other criminal, he recognized Christ's power. He recognized Christ's authority, and he recognized that he was wrong. In verse 42, he goes on to ask, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. So if we follow that example, if we recognize that we're wrong, we recognize that Christ has the authority, Christ has the power to save us, we can have what he had. His outcome, verse 43, today you will be with me in paradise. We all have that opportunity. We can all be in paradise with Christ one day. If we have the right reaction, if we follow Christ, follow his teaching and do God's will. So I asked you tonight, what is your reaction to Christ? How are you reacting in your life? Do you need help with your reaction to Christ? We're ready to assist you at this time, and we offer you this opportunity to come forward as we stand and sing.
When this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life are gone, I'll fly away. Like a bird from prison bars that's flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, I'll fly
Again, to see everybody out tonight. Thanks to Dustin for sponsoring the invitation. Thanks also to all of our teachers, as always, for the work they put in to pull the classes off here at Vanity. Got several things to be mindful of as we go forward. Like I said, Matt needs a couple of minutes after the closing prayer to run through the results of that communication test. Before then, though, we have some announcements. I don't have all the facts. Some of you might be able to fill a few things in for me. There was a natural gas, or believed to be a natural gas explosion over in Jeffersonville over the weekend. It's believed that it was a member of one of the churches over there. I don't have a name. It was the family that was unfortunately killed in that. Mark and Lori Nevins lived in that same neighborhood. So my understanding is that they were close enough that it was a big enough blast that windows in their own house get blown out. So if anybody knows anything more about that, jump in. Otherwise, something to be looking for some more information on and something to pray about in the meantime. Other announcements that need to be made tonight. The Barons are away from us. What else? Mark's working.
My sister gave birth to a healthy baby girl yesterday, and so depending on when they go home from the hospital, we may or may not be out of town this weekend. So, but good news there.
Things mentioned tonight. See any hands? Tony was listed for the closing prayer. Obviously not with us this evening. We'll ask Warren if he could close the prayer for us.
Our God, most high and heavenly Father, we're thankful once again to come together at midweek and to study your word. You're always edifying us. Come together and solve the problems and trouble away from us. Life precious. Very well as mentioned. Continue to pray for Janet and Shirley. Deal with her illness and pray be with us now as we prepare to depart this place. Thank you all for your Son, our Savior. We all
All right. Real quick, I don't want to keep us long tonight. So the directory is all but done while Dan's kind of shutting that off.